Okay, we're live. It's another Wednesday lunchtime online conversation, Tim. We're getting good at these, aren't we?
It doesn't seem very long since we did the last one.
I know. It was only last week that we were around. Oh, that's the doorbell. See, I told you again. But luckily, it started early on. Yeah, only last week we were doing the rewilding conversation. So it was really great. It's been great. If you're just joining us now, this is another online conversation that we're doing with Fresh Expressions. There's so many different people that are part of the movement. People doing, like Andrew, who have done research and written books and know far more than we do about stuff, and it's great to draw from their wisdom. But also, what's great about Fresh Expressions is that it's all about kind of putting it into practice, and so that's why it's great whoever's joining us today to kind of you can join in the conversation as well. And if you're joining us, like, do say hi and say like where you are in the country or in the world. We've had lots of international people, haven't we, Tim?
Yeah, we have. Yeah, it's been great. Yep.
So yeah, it's been really fun. So do say hello, and join in the conversation. We're going to chat to Andrew a bit about his book, but also if you've got questions, then we'd love to kind of hear them as well, so that it's more of a conversation with everyone who's watching. So yeah, it's just exciting to be here again. And Andrew, where are you in the country?
I'm in the People's Republic of Dudley in the West Midlands, so pretty much as central and landlocked as you can get. We actually live right on the very edge, actually, of Dudley Borough, so we're 15 miles west of the centre of Birmingham, but half a mile to our west, you're into the open countryside, and actually about half a mile away from us, Shropshire, Staffordshire and Worcestershire all converge. So we're kind of right on the edge of an urban conurbation, but right next to some rather beautiful rural settings as well.
Amazing. And Tim, you're not far really. You're Midlandsy way, aren't you?
In Hinckley. No nuclear power station here, but we have Triumph motorcycles. So that's we're more or less slap bang in the middle of the country. We Leicester and Coventry. So
amazing. And I'm in Liverpool, so I'm up north. We've got Michael Beck. Good morning, Michael.
Hello, Michael.
From Florida. I imagine it's better weather than we've got here right now, because it is appalling. It has not stopped raining. Also, Michael, I will plug it later as well. Michael is doing a conversation with Mike Moynier. They've just released a book called 21st Century Christian, that they're doing a conversation with Simon at 7 p.m. tomorrow on the Fresh Expressions Facebook and YouTube pages. So so do join Michael and Mike, the two Mikes, as they talk about their book. But yeah, we've got a few people saying hi, which is amazing. So yeah, we'll kick off now as we've had people join us. Welcome to the Fresh Expressions online conversation. I'm Lizzie. I work for Fresh Expressions in communications, and I live in Liverpool and run Story House with my husband. It's a coffee shop and a charity and a fresh expression of church. And then we have Tim Lee. Tim, introduce yourself.
I work for Fresh Expressions 3 days a week doing networking and facilitating. So if you like, it's not so much about kind of leading, but about facilitating, creating space and networking with people. I live in, live in Hinckley, and we've got a kind of a Fresh Expression meets on a Wednesday evening. There's just a small group of us who are kind of working out what it means to follow Jesus day by day, which is just, it's a lot of fun. We're really sad at the moment, actually, because we can't meet face to face. We usually meet on the allotment or in someone's back garden. So
I can't wait to actually hang out with people.
So Andrew, it is brilliant to have you here. Thank you for giving your time today. Really excited. I was trying to think, when did we first actually meet? So you and I have worked together for some time, haven't we? I worked with you when you were director of training for Fresh Expressions. I
mean, it would be the mid-2000s, I think, the mid-noughties, Tim, because I joined the Fresh Expressions team in 2005. So I had the privilege of being part of the original foundational Fresh Expressions team. originally joined that part-time to research discipleship was my initial brief. And then I was asked to begin to develop the Vision Day program, which is, I think, Tim, when you and I will have first met, although you're an associate missioner too, so we might have met via that as well.
Yeah.
And then about 2008, I was given the honor of becoming director of training. And around about that point, you took over the running of the Vision Day program. And, we've done lots of stuff together over the years. So it's good to be together.
And I mean, you look pretty kind of fresh-faced and clean-cut, but actually you're a villain, aren't you?
Are you referring to the football allegiances now? Yes. Yes, I often say I love sport, but still support Aston Villa because it's a bit of a sort of oxymoron. But yes, but actually, happily, we're doing well this season. We were completely rubbish last season. Got away with a dodgy goal that should have been allowed. Otherwise, we've been relegated. But who knew that this season would be so good?
Yeah.
Amazing. It's so it's great that, Andrew, you have so much experience in Fresh Expressions throughout the years, and I've got a copy of your book here, Holy Habits, which I have not finished, but I would definitely recommend people to read. It's just, I love reading, and it's so well written, and so it engages you straight away, and there are so many stories. And I've read a lot of Christian books, and some can be quite boring, but this is not boring. It's really interesting and it's really well written. So I would definitely recommend it. But yeah, so Andrew, like, obviously you've written more than one book. You've written lots of books, but just wanted to find out kind of where the idea for Holy Habits came from, and how did it come about, really?
Yeah, thanks, Lizzie. I mean, it has a very specific origin. It comes from an MA essay that I wrote. When I was working for Fresh Expressions, the wonderful Steve Croft encouraged me to do an MA in Durham alongside the work that I was doing. Even more wonderfully, he offered to pay for it from Fresh Expressions, for which I'm forever grateful. And one of the modules in that master's program was a module on the Book of Acts. So we studied Acts, and then we had to write an essay out of the module. And the essay title that I chose to work with, for obvious reasons, was to what extent do we see the picture that Luke presents in Acts 2:42 to 47 reappearing in Fresh Expressions of Church today? So that's the specific genesis of Holy Habits. It comes out of biblical research into Acts, and I read all the commentaries, I had the pile this big, but also specific experience of Fresh Expressions of Church around the country, partly ones I'd developed myself, but more ones that I'd visited or encountered through my work with the Fresh Expressions Agency.
Amazing. So in Holy Habits, there are 10 habits. Is that right? And we were wondering, our wondering is, if you're watching today, can you name any of the 10 habits? And if so, can you put them in the comments to see if we can together as a community, can we remember the 10 holy habits, or will Andrew have to tell it? He's got to remember them as well.
Always the embarrassing moment, because I always remember about 8 or 9 and forget a couple. But I tell you what, we give folk a clue, and I'll read the text, because actually, if anybody's interested in developing holy habits, we're going to tell you about resources later on. But actually, I think there are 2 things that you actually really need. One is Luke's text, and the other is the Holy Spirit. And actually, with those 2 things, with your own imagination and leadership, you can do all of this stuff yourselves. So let's hear the text. And then, as Lizzie says, if anybody wants to identify the habits and post them in the comments box, please do. Or you can cheat from your prior knowledge and just listen and embarrass me because I'll have forgotten them. So here we go. Acts 2:42. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. All came upon everyone because many wonders and signs were being done by the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved.
Amazing.
Brilliant.
We have one suggestion, but
Yep.
I don't think it's in there.
Go on,
Drink
then.
enough coffee and do it together with Jesus. But I think there are, I mean, you know, hospitality, that's in there.
Yeah, it would fit, Martin, that would fit perfectly with eating together as well. It's all part of that habit wrapped up. Want to say eating and drinking together, we tick that one.
Definitely. I think also good coffee is very important for me as part of my life as a disciple of Jesus. It's like we've got another one. Generosity.
Yeah. In Holy Habits, we talk about gladness and generosity. Luke says they ate their food with glad and generous hearts, and we kind of explore both the fun aspects of those habits, because maybe that's the first thing that comes to mind when we hear about gladness, joyful, fun type stuff, but also the generosity side of that actually takes us to some really, really deep places too, places of forgiveness and so on, and reconciliation that are really challenging. So, yep, that's two.
We've got the breaking bread from Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Interesting. The only habit that's mentioned twice in the text. Ooh. And you might want to come back to this in the discussion later, but where does Luke say they broke bread together? At home.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Controversial. That's brilliant. We've got prayer.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Prayer, bang on. Not surprising in a Lucan-based passage. Luke's Gospel and Acts are saturated with prayer. And it's interesting in how these habits all play out in the mixture of real life. One or two of them, like prayer, and one other that we'll see if you mention, are kind of arguably foundational habits that actually undergird and wash through all of the other ones. And I'd suggest prayer is something like that. I think it's saying in the book is prayer is like the spiritual air that we breathe. You know, without prayer, we're pretty much dead. So, yeah, good. We're doing well. That's 4.
Well, Andy says he could cheat. So he's very honest. He's very honest, Andy. But you can. It's okay. That's research. We'll allow it. We've got Martin, fellowship.
Yeah, thank you.
And then Leslie serving.
Yeah, both got.
And Shirley. Yeah.
Interestingly, with the fellowship one, just to mention that quickly, we'll mention some resource books later on. Interestingly, we offer resource books habit by habit, and not surprisingly, the most popular book that people have bought is the one on prayer. Last year, during lockdowns 1 or 2, there was a noticeable increase in people exploring the habit of fellowship. Maybe we're still having to dig into that. Maybe actually having been denied the physicality of fellowship, we were really having to think through how do we share together deeply and meaningfully in ways that are life-giving when we can't physically meet. So that was quite interesting, the upsurge in interest in that one last year.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, and it's, I suppose, also when it's been taken away, it's that kind of rethinking, well, what does that look like and what does it mean, like when it's missing as well. Yeah, that's so good. It was as well on Google searches for prayer and how to pray in lockdown went up significantly. I don't know the stats, but just people generally with an interest in kind of faith and spirituality, especially among younger generations, which was amazing. Again, like one of the main kind of habits of discipleship, but people were actually Googling like how to pray. And
prayer, I think prayer is a missional activity as well, Lizzie. I mean, I know John Drain has commented on how in lockdown he's been inundated with requests from people of faith and those not professing faith asking for prayer. And I think sometimes we kind of underestimated the value and importance of practices like prayer that we might have thought were more sort of pastoral in orientation. but are actually really significant missional gifts that we can offer to the community.
Yeah.
So again, it's interesting, Lizzie, what you say. It seems that people are looking for prayer and wanting to know how to pray. That is one of the gifts that we've been blessed with that we can offer.
Definitely. And teaching people how to pray, because I think people don't realize how easy it is, or that there's something you need to say, and so making it more normal is such a big part of it. We've got Jamie said teaching and learning as another holy habit.
Yep, we talk about biblical teaching. It's a slight rephrasing of Luke's opening comment about they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. One of my great mentors, the late great Scottish theologian Jimmy Dunn, in his commentary on Acts, argues that phrase, the apostles' teaching, was largely comprised of two things. One was the Hebrew scriptures, our Old Testament, and the other was the teachings of Jesus that the early church circulated and explored and lived together. So for me, that's a big chunk of biblical teaching, which is why I phrased it that way.
Yeah, we've got one more, very important.
Yeah,
making
more disciples. Yeah, thank you. Again, that's a slight reworking of Luke's closing phrase, the Lord added to their number daily those who are being saved. But interestingly, there is a strong argument that the making of more disciples is actually the natural outworking of the other 9 habits when they are lived faithfully and fruitfully and well. Again, another influence on me was David Watson, and in his comments on this passage, he says, is it any wonder that the church grew as it did when people were living life in this way? Because who wouldn't want to be part of a community that is glad and generous? Who wouldn't want to be a part of a community that gives to anybody as they had need, who serves others without care for themselves and so on? So I think it's an interesting evangelistic model as well. Acts 2. Again, interesting, there's no overt proclamation in that model. It's about living life in a godly, Christ-like way that other people want to be part of, and want to explore. So, yeah, making more disciples, is it a natural outworking of the other 9 habits?
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, it was an attractive community. People wanted to be part of it. How many have we got? How many did we get?
I think we've got 8. Now, it's really, really interesting, Lizzie, because one that nobody, I don't think they've mentioned it, unless I didn't notice it. Nobody's mentioned worship, have they?
No, I don't think, no.
I don't think so. And, when I was writing the Holy Habits book, actually, I wrote the chapter on worship last because it seemed to be, I don't know, the other things needed to take preference for me. And yet so often we've kind of made it our default thing. Now, please don't get me wrong here. I'm just going to plug my computer in because it's gone a bit dark on me. I'm not saying that worship isn't important. But actually, we did a lot of work in this with the Fresh Expressions team. Should it be the first thing that we pay attention to, or should it emerge out of the other things?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I think as Fresh Expressions, we begin the kind of start of Fresh Expressions compared to, say, church planting.
Yeah,
the place of praise and worship and how it's introduced. I think there can be quite a big contrast between the two, because often with traditional church, and a lot of people kind of think it's quite good to talk about, really, because to just look at the foundations of how Fresh Expressions come into being. But with church planting, with my friends at church planting, you start with a service, and you start with kind of the traditional worship service, whereas with Fresh Expressions, that's not where you begin. And so it's interesting, that where you place that chapter in the book. Yeah.
And the other missing one was the giving or the sharing of resources. We kind of use those titles interchangeably. And again, I think that's one that lockdown and constraints have refocused our attention on. What do we have? What do we have to share? And again, so many good examples of Fresh Expressions and inherited churches actually saying, come on, stop holding on to this stuff. We've got to share it with the community, and that's a good thing.
Mm.
I'm fascinated by that, just that little phrase, in the home.
Yeah.
It's very easy to gloss over that, but actually it just seems to be such an important place. And I just wonder, at this time, Andrew, whether you kind of have any kind of thoughts about that, particularly about what that means in that context, but also then how that might inform us today.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I think it's hugely significant, the attention that Luke gives to that setting. One of the comments that drove me to write the book and all the other things that have followed is one by the biblical commentator Kingsley Barrett, who said Luke was quite deliberate in writing this passage and painting this picture and offering this model because he wanted us to imitate it. Okay. So this is close as we get, certainly in the Lucan texts in the New Testament, to a model of what it is to be church community. And I think it's highly significant that within that model, the home has a preeminent place. Now, Luke still honours the place of the temple, which we might want to use as shorthand for our church buildings or maybe even our cathedrals in these days. So he doesn't dismiss that. He notes that they still went there to worship and so on. But he actually puts a whole lot of emphasis on the home, as he did in his storytelling about Jesus.
Yeah.
And for Jesus, many of the transformational encounters and the growth in discipleship encounters took place in the domestic setting, or out in a field or whatever with the friends. But it was very much that sort of homely domestic unit. So I think the home as a place of discipleship formation, it was already beginning to be drawn to our attention pre-pandemic. I know Lucy Moore, for example, at Messy Church, absolutely passionate about and committed to the home as a place of discipleship. I do some writing and work for the Roots for Worship resources, and we had pre-pandemic identified the need to begin to equip people and families to worship together at home and so on. So I think a lot of this is coming down the tracks. And of course, many fresh expressions have begun in the home, and many have stayed in the home. Many believe that is the calling for the size of their community. And if they grow too much, they multiply. They don't just get bigger and bigger till they can't meet in their home. And it's interesting, in Acts, even at the end of Acts, there is still no church larger than one that can actually meet in the home. Now, granted, some of those homes are pretty big. If you're a centurion or something, you're likely to have a big house. But still, the home was the primary place of meeting. And the last lecture I heard Jimmy Dunn give, and Jimmy sadly died last year, was on Acts. And I'll remember for as long as I live his sign-off line. At the end of his lecture, having explored the ecclesiology of Acts, he said, we often say we've got too many smaller churches. My question is, have we got enough? And I think one other thing, Tim, quickly about the home, of course, it was an intergenerational model as well.
Yeah.
So the children were present when they ate together and when they broke bread. In the Jewish household, which of course was the setting, children were encouraged to ask their questions. They facilitated very often the learning that was going on. So all ages were present together, were valued together, learnt together, ate together, prayed together, grew together. And I think that's one of the values that lies within Holy Habits, as with things like Messy Church as well, that it is all age, it is intergenerational. So yeah, you're right. I think the place of the home is really, really interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, that's fascinating. So I just wonder if we should kind of go and have a look, see what some people are asking questions. If you've got some questions that you want to ask Andrew directly, please post them in the chat now, and we can. Some people have already begun to ask some questions, so we'll. Have you seen anything that you can pick out?
I don't know. Does the miraculous feature? Because obviously in the passage. So yeah, just wondering. Yeah. From your research, what would your response be to that question?
Yeah. Hi, Jamie. Thank you for the question. Does the miraculous feature? Yes, is the quick answer. In the Holy Habits book, I've put a chapter in here on wonders and signs, to use Luke's exact phrase. And some people have said, well, why isn't that the 11th habit, or get rid of one or the other and make it one of the 10? I suggest in the book that the miraculous, the wonders and signs, are almost by definition qualitatively different to the other 10 habits. To be wonders and signs, there needs to be something unexpected about them, something, overtly of God blessing the community with that sign or that wonder, so that can't be practiced in a way that the other habits can be practiced. The other thing I think I would want to say is that, a bit like the more we live the habits faithfully and fruitfully, the more disciples will be made. I think the more we live these habits faithfully and fruitfully, the more signs of God's grace we will see, and the more wonders of his love will become apparent as well. So I think that there is something going on there as well, that we can't practice them in the way that we can practice the other things, but we should be open, and we shouldn't be surprised if the more we live this Christ-like way of life, we just see more signs and wonders happening, because that's what God is like.
Yeah, I think that what I loved about at the end of your book, it talked about expectation, and how often as a church we just look at declining numbers, and it's good to know and to see, what the numbers are like, and be like, well, we've got to rethink. That's where Fresh Expressions again came from. Is like, you're trying to connect with people that aren't connecting with church, and we can't bury our heads in the sands, but also we need to still have an expectation that God is at work, and that he can move, and he is bringing transformation, and not limit our prayers or our expectation of what is possible. And that requires faith. But I think that's a huge part, especially when you're starting something in a new community, is not to limit your imagination, and or your prayers or your expectation. And I think it's quite British. We're just like, oh well, we'll see. If one person comes, it'll be okay. We've just started this new kind of course in our Fresh Expression, looking at Ephesians, and there's like a study book to go with it. So we're trying to encourage people to do like daily study. And in faith we ordered like a certain number. We ordered 20 books, and then 28 people wanted books. We're like, we didn't have enough faith. We didn't think everyone would want to do a Bible study. So expectation is a really key part, I think, of like serving God and being a disciple. We've got a question here from Martin. Which habit needs to develop most in our culture, in your opinion? Just a small one.
Well, I think, Martin, I think last year, when the pandemic began to develop and so on, we had a quick chat at BRF, who published the various Holy Habits resources. And, I felt really quite strongly that we needed to focus on sharing resources because of the context that we were in. And I think one of the lovely things about this gift of a passage that Luke has given to us is that every time we read it, I will often say to people, notice what you notice. What is the Spirit drawing to your attention today? And I think, back in the spring of last year, my attention seemed to be drawn to sharing resources. Then, as I mentioned earlier, I think we began to see the relational poverty that COVID was causing. So our attention was drawn to the importance of fellowship at that time. Literally in the last week, my own attention has been drawn to the habit of serving in dialogue with my local church. because I think that's what's being drawn to our attention at the moment, that we need to give more time and attention to. So I don't want to kind of duck the question, but I think it's almost defining our culture. I think there may be something generically, you know, as a nation, what might we need to have our attention drawn to? It'd be interesting to watch Biden's inauguration later on today and see what he is drawing the American people's attention to, you know, at this transitional point for them. But I think in terms of the locale, and in terms, I think, of the fresh expression that you may be part of, or the church you're part of, I think that's a critical question to ask in community, and ask, what is the Spirit drawing to our attention now?
Yeah.
I think that's really powerful, actually, because I think our danger is that we set a direction of travel and think, and actually it is contextual. That you know, is dependent upon what is going on at the time. And I think that, if you like, what that invites us into is a continuing relationship with Jesus, which actually is surely what it is about. I think that's why you have talked about these holy habits. You know, it is about, centered around Jesus, which says, so actually, where does this fit, and what is it that God might be saying, and what's the Holy Spirit saying to us at this particular point in time, in this particular context?
Definitely. It's the listening again, which is such a key part of Fresh Expressions at every stage. I think also the demographic that you're connecting with, there are different challenges depending on, you know, the kind of group of, so we're really passionate about young adults, and the challenge, the discipleship challenges there are very different to different generations. And I think I was trying to think how I would apply it to the holy habits. I think the kind of sharing together in community, although they're very connected with technology, it's that thing of like your yes be yes and your no be no. It's like commitment and covenant relationship. They're very transient in relationships, and it's very hard to get them to commit to stuff, and they withdraw very easily when things are difficult, and so that's a struggle we've had with establishing a community that stays together when things are difficult. That's been particularly challenging with millennials. So I think it's different. There's different things, and then the context as well. Like, we're in a middle class setting, so then you've got that thing of it's easy to hide, and so that there's different challenges to discipleship and community. I think definitely in a different context, but it just takes time to understand the people.
I wonder, Lizzie, if with that, there are helpful links there to thinking about rules of life and rhythms of life, and covenants of accountability between each other. Shortly after we began to develop the Holy Habits resources, we came across a video produced by Christian Aid, entirely independently, nothing to do with Holy Habits, but it focused on some young adults, probably sort of only mid-20s, I would guess. And they were sat around a table in a garden eating together, about 8 of them, and they were lamenting at that young age what they had already lost from their times together in the sort of university setting, when they used to hang out together, when they used to eat together, when they used to study the Bible together, when they used to do, you know, projects of service together. And, you know, they I think were beginning to stumble towards the need to have some sort of rule of life or covenant of accountability or so on, that just in a gentle, not coercive way, actually helped each other to keep each other accountable to these practices that they knew were foundational for followers of Jesus, and when lived missionally are effective in blessing others and making more disciples. So I think I think putting alongside the habits, you know, rhythms and rule of life, and some of the insights that we get from new monasticism can be really, really valuable, because we all get out of habits. You know, I do, everybody does. So how do we keep each other accountable in a loving way?
Definitely. And I think that can be evangelistic in itself, of like developing a rule of life. You're kind of helping people do life well, and that in itself can draw people into the community, and we've found that. So I think everything can be kind of a way of preaching what it's like to follow Jesus, and showing them that just a rule of life and discipleship, the life of a disciple is so key in that, as you kind of explained. We've got some more questions. There's been a lot of talk of lament as a practice recently. Jeremy, thank you for your question. I love talking about lament. I could do like hours on this. But I think it was Tom Wright said, should this be a spiritual discipline, lament?
Yeah.
And I don't know where you would see lament fitting in the Holy Habit, or any thoughts about lament, especially in this moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think prayer is an obvious habit to locate lament in, but also worship as well. And I think many newer worshipping communities, this is purely an observation, forgive me for caricatures and all that and so on, I think there's a natural and understandable tendency within the worship and newer communities to concentrate on the more celebratory and proclamatory aspects of worship. But biblically, worship is really very balanced between the celebratory and the praise orientated and the lament. So I think in exploring worship, I think what part lament has to play in that, I think would be really, really important. When it comes to biblical teaching, again, which aspects of biblical teaching do we explore? Do we only explore the triumphant celebratory texts, or do we look, as I know my son's local church has been looking at lately, the book of Lamentations? It's not often a go-to text. So I think I'd never want to say discipleship is confined to these 10 practices we've identified in Acts 2. Of course it doesn't. You might want to add lament as another habit yourself, as a distinct habit, or you might want to say, how do we ensure that lament is an appropriate part of worship, an appropriate part of prayer, an appropriate part of service as well? So in our political activism, in our writing to our local councillors, we can lament the decisions that our leaders have taken. So, when our government chose to cut the international aid budget, I wrote to my MP to lament that decision.
Yep.
And again, that may be something we could do collectively within our churches, because collectivity has real power, and say to our local leaders, that decision you've taken, we really lament that, and we'd like you to reverse that, please. So yeah, again, lament could wash through. When we eat together, we might lament those who have no food to eat and actually choose to fast on that occasion. So yeah, brilliant question, Jeremy. I'd encourage us all, myself included, to think, how is lament present within all of these practices?
Yeah, definitely. It's worship's not an escape from reality, and so lament should always be a part of it. I think teaching people to lament is one of the gifts the church has to offer our culture in this moment. I don't think we know how to navigate it like Western culture, and I think it's an incredible gift we have to offer. Let's have a look. We've got some great comments. Where was it? I saw something. Jan, this is a bit of a different angle, but it's whether there's any ideas or suggestions on support and oversight of home discipleship. Obviously, this is a really important question, or a thing to be talking about now. I don't know if either of you know anything, or any resources or examples that you've seen of home discipleship.
I think, again, Jan, it obviously will depend upon a little bit of the context.
Yeah.
So this may be one of the advantages of being part of a denomination, for example. If your community is part of a wider denomination, then there would usually be some sort of oversight and accountability structures in place. I think the more interesting question here, and I think this is an open question for the Fresh Expressions movement, actually, is where fresh expressions emerge organically, or a small community of friends of Jesus chooses to gather together to meet together and church begins to form. How do they access oversight and accountability? I think I'd want to answer your question with a question there. And I don't know if Tim or Lizzie from more active involvement in the movement more recently might have anything to add there.
I think it's a good point, and I think there are some, if you like, some issues around that people are very aware of, if you like. I think for me also, Jan, I think I would kind of want to see, actually, can you use the 10 habits as a lens through which to look through? In terms of actually, if you like, what's happening in terms of discipleship? If one of them is making more disciples, where are we seeing that lived out? Because I think sometimes actually, it can become quite insular. Actually, what I think Acts 2 really highlights, and which Andrew has done brilliantly, is just highlight that actually there's an outward dimension to it as well as an internal dimension to it, and that actually those two have to go hand in hand together. Otherwise, actually, it just becomes habits.
Yeah, I think there's when you see there's people in our community who do it naturally and really well, or aspects of home discipleship really well, and I think encouraging that and getting them to share stories about it in the community you're a part of. So I think family life, even some of my friends who are church leaders now, they didn't grow up in Christian homes, and they had children. They didn't know, they'd never seen it modeled how to do faith as a family. And they had to create habits at meal times and things. And so there's really simple things that maybe people in your community who've had faith for longer do naturally, that they don't even realize they're doing, but they are discipling, like in the home, they are discipling their children. And so I think it's as you start to share life or see what people do, it's kind of going, that's amazing, and then get them to tell other people in the community about that, to help them see different models. Because we have quite a lot of families in our community, and we're putting together, it's only small, but we're putting together packs every month for the families to do, all on the same theme for the different age groups, so they can look at the Bible and look at faith together. So it's something they do as a family, and so we've just got someone in our church who she's been walking with Jesus for a long time, and she's got a family, and so she's kind of using her experience to kind of help other people. There is the kitchen table project, which comes out of Care for the Family, I think, and they've got good ideas for family home discipleship. But I think sharing stories is a great thing, but it's the context and listening. But I think it is really, really important, because ultimately we are responsible for our own discipleship. A church or a church leader cannot make you become a better disciple of Jesus, but we can help equip.
I'm just thinking too back to the conversation which we had really helpfully with Georgia Lings about the 7 sacred spaces. And if you like, I think the danger is that what we do, we put discipleship in the home and think it's then about number of people. Actually, the place of the contemplation of silence and solitude can work its way out quite naturally in a home setting. And that still works its way out in terms of discipleship. So I think the element of sometimes how that works its way out, I think, can be really interesting. So I just want to move us on. Andrew, you are prolific in terms of kind of writing about this, but you've got a new a book coming out, which is Holy Habits Following Jesus, Ideas for Lent and during Holy Week. So I know. I've looked through this, and there are some really, really helpful, simple things to be able to do based around a household. You even invite people to place a tax return as the focus of worship, which I find fascinating. So if you want to know more about that, you need to buy a copy of the book from the wonderful people at BRF, and we'll put a link up for you later. But I just think, Andrew, do you want to make any comments about this and about how people might use this, and why it is that you particularly wrote it in this way? Because I think it's quite interesting, actually.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Yeah, I mean, the book that Tim's been waving around came out of a conversation with BRF. We were thinking about how we might offer a Lent course based on holy habits. And I said, well, it'd be good to offer something Lent and Holy Week, because often we get to the end of Lent and then stumble into Holy Week, or don't use Holy Week as reflectfully and richly as we might. So this has got resources for both of those, for Lent and Holy Week. And we started to think about, well, what focus should we give to this? And of course, the original Holy Habits book and materials all focused on Acts. And we thought, well, hang on a second, why don't we go back to the life of Jesus and actually see how these 10 practices actually shaped Jesus as well? Because one of the things I often say when I'm talking about holy habits is that they didn't begin at the point in time that Luke was describing in Acts 2. They are there throughout the Gospels. They're there throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament as well. So actually, doing this gave us the opportunity to focus on Jesus himself, always a good thing to do, and to see how he lived and shared these practices, how they formed him, and how through him they blessed others. So the focus in this book is very much on Jesus, whereas the focus in the original book was on the early church.
Great, fantastic. And I know that if you like, the way that you've kind of set it out, then you give some people something to read, something for them to respond to, a way that they can pray, some good conversation kind of starters. And then also there's a kind of a take-home idea. I find quite fascinating. So if you like, we're saying that this isn't just something which you come to and then stops. Actually, you need to take it through the rest of the week. Yeah,
thanks, Tim. And now that brings us to the tax return as well. It's interesting, isn't it? Thinking about discipleship, Jesus spoke about money more than any other subject. So it's part of discipleship. And I suggest for that session, people place a tax return in the middle of the room, or we'll do it online if we're doing it online or whatever. And just ask questions about how and why we pay tax, and what attitude do we bring to that? Do we actually see it as a way of giving and blessing others, or do we begrudge it and moan about it? Is it actually, maybe for many of us, the biggest way in which we share resources? If 20% of our income is going out of the door, that's a pretty big way of sharing the resources that we've been blessed with. And I think for me, discipleship is about real life. It's about your tax return. It's about how we treat the person at the supermarket, particularly at the moment, who is putting their life at risk in serving us food. All of these things are where it really, really gets lived out. I love that quote about Jesus. I can't remember who said it, that Jesus didn't come to make us more religious. He came to make us more human.
Yeah.
So in the totality of human life and what it means to be human, what do these godly practices that Luke presents to us in Acts 2 that we see embodied in Jesus, what do they look like in us today? Because the opening passage of John's Gospel, when he says the word became flesh and dwelt amongst us, in one way that was a unique point in time miracle. But in another real way, to go back to the signs and wonders conversation, That's a miracle God wants to reproduce in us every single day. The word becomes flesh in us. It gets expressed in grace and truth. And this world that God loves gets blessed. That's discipleship.
Fantastic. That's a brilliant kind of picture to kind of to hold inside our heads. Thank you. Thank you. It's really good. So just a couple of comments. Andrew, is there anything else that you just want to add in terms of that? Do you want to, I'm just aware you've got, there are loads of other resources. Do you want to just highlight some of those?
Yeah, just quickly on this one, Tim. Again, if folk are interested, you can get the book and use it in your own groups. We will be doing another national online home group. We did one last year and it was enormous fun. But here are all the references. Karen, brilliant. Hi, Karen. My friend, colleague, partner at BRF. If you want to join us and be part of a national online home group, you can do this. You can get the resources and run your own home group. We're right in the midst at the moment of recording videos that will accompany each session. They're about 12 minutes long. So in addition to what's in the book, there will be videos available. So if you want to run your own group, those videos will be up 2 weeks before each session. You can download them and use them with your own group, or you can join us in the national group if you like. So yeah, that's the materials that are available for Lent. But then there's a whole family of other things that are available. I'll tell you about the BRF ones first, so not to confuse you. We have a series of daily Bible reading reflections. All of these have been written by different authors. One of the lovely things about the Acts passage is Luke says all the believers were together. So as Holy Habits has evolved, we've tried to get more and more people involved, and now over 200 people have written for these materials. So there's a Bible reflection booklet for each habit, 40 daily reflections in here, written by 4 different authors. So they're pretty much designed for personal daily devotional stuff. Complementing those are a series of group study booklets. Again, one of these on each of the habits. Again, each of these booklets is written by 4 different people. So if you want resources for your small groups, these are available from BRF. Then for people really wanting to go the whole hog and think about how Holy Habits can shape or reform their church, Fresh Expression or Inherited, there are these 60-page resource booklets with a whole miscellany of ideas of things that you can do in small groups, in gathered worship, in social engagement, community practice, books to read, films to watch, whatever. Just a whole miscellany of resources to use. Again, one on each of the habits, those available from BRF. Lucy and I collaborated to produce this book, Holy Habits in Messy Church. When Holy Habits came out, Lucy was absolutely thrilled to see it and thought it could be a major help to those developing messy churches. So this is a dedicated book for those in the messy church context, again, available from BRF. And then final gratuitous plug, the original Holy Habits book is here, crammed full of stories of people living this stuff, crammed full of stories from Fresh Expressions as well. And so this is available. This is published by my friend Malcolm Down at Malcolm Down Publishing. So there are links to this via the BRF website. It's on all good bookstores, online and physical when they're open. Or if you want this book, you can get it direct from me by emailing me at holyhabits@btinternet.com. And I can get this to you directly, or go to Eden or wherever. Try and avoid the one beginning with A, because be more generous and go to Eden or somewhere.
It is amazing, the stories in the book. I would definitely recommend it, and it's great if you're thinking of maybe starting a Fresh Expression, especially coming out of this season, to see and read stories of people that have done all different kinds of Fresh Expressions around the country to kind of help inspire you really of what is possible.
And I think that, thank you, Lucy, and if I could just come in there, because I think, again, it may have moved on in my day. What a terrible phrase. But, I think, it was Steve Croft who said, sort of, I don't know, kind of 7 or 8 years into Fresh Expressions, the movement, that it had been very strong in developing missiological thinking. His observation that it had not been quite so strong in developing ecclesiological thinking.
Yep.
So actually, mission-shaped church, fresh expressions of church. But what is this thing called church that we are seeking to form? What should it look like and whatever? So that's where I go back to Acts 2 and say, here is one picture, one model, and I'd always emphasize that it's one amongst many. So if this is helpful to you, Luke's model in Acts 2 is one of the best biblical models, I think, of what church should look like, be about, feel, do, experience, and so on. So in terms of a practical, grounded ecclesiology, I think Acts 2 is really, really helpful. And if the Holy Habits resources help you unpack that, then, bless you in using them. Other good resources are available. And please, if something else is better or more appropriate for you, bless you in using that.
Amazing. Oh, that's so great. I think, going back to Acts 2 and those where the church was formed, especially in this season when life doesn't look like it used to, church doesn't look like it used to, and that's a good thing to go back to basics and just start with Acts and let your imagination go, give that to God and see what could happen. Don't think about what was, think about what could be. And I think it's going back to the drawing board now, which is exciting and has potential.
Yeah. And Lizzie, if I could say, having used the inexcusable phrase in my day, for which I should be severely reprimanded, if I can encourage the pioneers watching here, having worked for the Fresh Expressions Agency for 8 years, I think Fresh Expressions is now really coming into its own.
Yep.
And I think it may be becoming even more apparent now why God brought this movement into being. Because I think with the collapse that COVID has brought upon us, we need fresh expressions of church more than ever now. And the accumulated learning of the last 15 years, I think, is really coming into its season of preeminent need. So, those of you out there who are doing this stuff in new and innovative and fresh ways, bless you, because I think you're God's people for God's time. And, when some of us were at the forefront of this 15 years ago, we could never have envisaged what's come now. And I'm so glad that you who are at the front line now are doing this stuff, and bless you in that.
Yeah, I think we had a leadership community yesterday, and it was really interesting, and completely and utterly in exactly that place of, of the small, the many, the contextual. That's what we're about. And, if there's people out there who, need our help to be able to do that, and we can share some wisdom in an open-handed way, we'd love to hear from you and to work with you, get in touch with us.
Do get in touch.
Or sign up. But we sense that very much too. And I think it's really interesting. It's a little frightening in terms of the kind of the responsibility and how we work that out.
Yeah, no, it's great. Also, if you do want to sign up for our newsletter, there is a link at the top of this broadcast, but I will add it to the comments as well, so you can sign up and kind of hear about what we're up to. There are so many different things happening at the moment in Fresh Expressions. Tomorrow night, as I said, we've got 2 authors, Mike Moynier, he's been part of Fresh Expression for a long time, and Michael Beck, who is in the US, have written a book called 21st Century Christian, and they're going to be talking to Simon at 7 p.m. live on Facebook and YouTube tomorrow night, talking about that book and what it means to follow Jesus in the world today. And they both bring very different kind of perspectives and obviously experience from different cultures as well, but also we have next week we've got, and the adverts for these will all be online. Next Thursday we have a kind of online webinar about well-being in Fresh Expressions, because pioneering is hard at times. It can be lonely, and that's a big part of why Fresh Expressions exists, is to cheer you guys on and encourage you and tell you that you're not alone. And so we've got Andy Freeman from Space to Breathe, we've got Ruth Rice from Renew Wellbeing, and Rachel Jordan Wolf from Hope Together. They're going to be talking about wellbeing and the FX journey at 1 o'clock next Thursday. And then we're continuing with our rewilding conversations. The next one's in February, and we're looking at rewilding and the Holy Spirit. And we've got Paul Bradbury from CMS and some special guests. So do join us for that. So, but don't worry, if you can't remember all those things, it is fine, because if you follow us on social media, or if you get the newsletter, then you will have all the dates and information that you need. If you enjoyed this conversation as well, do like it and do share it as well if you think there's other people that could benefit from this conversation. And get the books, we want to hear about all the holy habits and how it's helped you in your communities. But thank you so much, Andrew, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Really, really fantastic. And just thank you for your ability to take something and to turn it into a language which makes sense. It is a real gift. And just that come with kind of, with the kind of the intellectual rigor, but it also comes with a humility and a brilliant open-handedness to offer it to us. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you both.
It's a real pleasure to have you with us. God bless you.
Thank you. And you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us, guys, and we will see you all soon at another